A group of aggressive bikers picked the wrong target when they decided to taunt an African-American soldier at a quiet gas station. Their mocking remarks, prejudice, and brazen challenges quickly escalated into a confrontation no one could have predicted. But the real takeaway isn't just in their actions. It's in how the soldier chose to confront hatred and ignorance. Can a single encounter challenge deep-seated prejudices and transform lives? Stay tuned. This story will unfold with unexpected twists and profound lessons about courage, respect, and change. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss more inspiring stories to come. The story begins. It was a serene afternoon, with sunlight stretching over the highway like a golden ribbon. Cars zipped by like flowing water, but at the small roadside gas station, the atmosphere seemed frozen in time. Apart from the steady hum of fuel pumps, it felt as though the scene was holding its breath, waiting for something to unfold. Near one of the gas pumps stood Daniel Carter, a tall African-American man in his mid-30s. He wore the unmistakable camouflage uniform of a soldier, though his worn-out sneakers told a different story, one of practicality over pretense. Daniel didn't give his shoes a second thought. He had just returned from an overseas deployment and was on his way home to see his family. His mind was filled with the thought of his mother's cooking, his younger sister's smile after years apart, and the relief of leaving the tension of the battlefield behind. The gas station was almost deserted, with only a few travelers stopping by for snacks and drinks. Daniel finished refueling his car and leaned against it while twisting the gas cap back on. His old sneakers scraped against the asphalt, a small reminder of comfort rather than status. He didn't notice the roar of motorcycles until it was almost upon him. A loud, rumbling convoy of motorbikes pulled into the gas station, their engines shattering the stillness. The riders were older men, clad in leather jackets adorned with patches that hinted at their identities as veterans. Their weathered faces, marked by years and hard experiences, betrayed no warmth or camaraderie today. Instead, their gazes locked on Daniel, the leader of the group, a towering man with a grizzled beard and piercing eyes, brought his bike to a halt near the pump closest to Daniel. His sharp gaze swept over Daniel's uniform and then lingered on his sneakers, his expression growing heavier and harder to read. The others followed suit, parking their bikes and falling silent, their attention focused on Daniel. American flags were stitched onto their jackets, but something in their demeanor made the air feel tense, like the calm before a storm. "Hey you!" The gruff voice of the leader broke the silence, cutting through the ambient hum of the station. Daniel looked up, startled, the gas pump nozzle still in his hand. "That uniform you're wearing, what's that about? Trying to pull some kind of stunt to get a veteran discount?" Daniel frowned, caught off guard by the accusation. Straightening up, he turned to face the man, calm but resolute. "Excuse me? What did you just say?" The biker, clearly unaccustomed to subtlety, revved his engine, the thunderous noise roaring like a declaration of dominance. "I'm talking to you," he said. "You think just because you throw on a uniform, people are going to hand you a discount? Look at your shoes, they don't even match the outfit." The group burst into laughter, their jeers adding fuel to their leader's fire. Daniel remained composed, though his expression shifted from surprise to mild irritation. "First," he replied, his voice steady and deep, "this gas station doesn't offer military discounts. Second, I don't need one. I'm just filling up and going on my way." The response didn't satisfy the leader. "You expect us to believe you're really a soldier? I don't see any badges or signs to back it up. You probably just bought that uniform from a thrift store." The tension escalated rapidly. Daniel could feel the hostility in their stares, every word from the bikers stoking the fire and burning away the fragile peace of the gas station. Inside the convenience store, the cashier nervously peeked out the window. A few customers lingered near the entrance, curious but wary, unwilling to intervene in what was clearly spiraling into a confrontation. Daniel took a slow, deep breath, carefully choosing his words. "I've served 3 tours overseas. I don't need to prove anything to you." But the leader wasn't interested in explanations. He dismounted his bike and took a step closer to Daniel, close enough that Daniel could smell the acrid stench of cigarettes on his breath. "Then why not show us some proof?" the man demanded, his tone sharper, more aggressive. "If you can't, I'll call the cops." Daniel stood his ground, unflinching. He had faced far worse on the battlefield, and though this situation was volatile, he knew he needed to keep his composure. Still, the tension was palpable, and the air seemed to thicken under the blazing midday sun. The leader moved closer, his presence imposing, the heat from his body nearly tangible. Around them, the other bikers began to encircle Daniel, their slow, deliberate steps forming a loose ring. Their intent was unmistakable, their loyalty to their leader absolute. The scene was unsettling. 6 men, all seasoned veterans of their own past battles, stared Daniel down as though preparing to teach him a lesson. The smell of asphalt mingled with the oppressive tension in the air, creating a suffocating atmosphere. Daniel remained steady, his posture calm but alert, knowing all too well how quickly the situation could spiral out of control. But Daniel was no stranger to moments like this. In the military, he had faced countless high-pressure situations where a single misstep could mean life or death. His training had taught him to stay calm under duress, to assess the situation before making a move. This moment was no different. Yet the blatant racism and disrespect he was enduring now, this was harder to ignore. He could feel the eyes of the bikers fixed on him, probing, searching for any sign of weakness they could exploit. Ray, the leader, a hulking man with a beard streaked with silver, sneered. His yellowed teeth, stained from years of cigarettes, glinted as he smirked and spoke with mocking condescension. "Listen here, kid. I've seen real soldiers. I fought alongside real men. You?" He chuckled darkly. "You don't look like a soldier to me. You think putting on that uniform makes you one of us?" Daniel could feel his blood boiling, but his expression remained composed. He knew Ray was deliberately trying to provoke him, trying to break his cool. He quickly scanned his surroundings, evaluating the situation. The gas station was almost deserted, with only a few witnesses inside the convenience store peering nervously through the window. The hum of traffic from the nearby highway and the faint beeping of the fuel pump faded into the background, overwhelmed by the immediate threat standing inches from him. Ray's companions began to jeer, their taunts feeding the growing tension. "Where's your military ID? Prove it if you're the real deal," another chimed in, laughing. "Bet you don't even know how to salute properly." The mockery stung, but Daniel refused to take the bait. He wasn't about to waste his words or dignity on men who weren't worth either. Ray stepped closer, invading Daniel's personal space, the acrid stench of his cigarette breath heavy in the air. "You think you can walk around in that uniform and no one's gonna call you out? This isn't a game, kid. This is real life. You don't deserve to wear that uniform, and you sure as hell don't deserve to be standing here." It was the final straw. Daniel could feel the anger rising, a steady boil in his chest. But before he could respond, Ray made his move. Ray lunged forward, his hand reaching out to grab Daniel by the collar of his uniform. The moment hung in the air, teetering on the edge of chaos. With a clumsy motion, Ray lunged at Daniel, his arms swinging wide in an attempt to grab Daniel's collar. It was a poorly executed attack, more bluster than skill, but it was enough to ignite the simmering tension. Daniel reacted instantly. His military training and instincts kicked in. In one swift, fluid motion, he sidestepped the attack, caught Ray's wrist, and twisted it backward with precise force. In the blink of an eye, Daniel brought Ray to the ground, pinning him in a hold that rendered him completely immobile. Ray let out a sharp cry of pain, his voice echoing across the gas station lot. The other bikers froze, their eyes wide with shock as they watched their leader subdued so easily. Ray's body was sprawled on the hot concrete, entirely under Daniel's control. The station fell silent. Even the customers inside the convenience store held their breath, their eyes glued to the unfolding. Seen through the glass windows, the tension was palpable, hanging heavy in the summer air like a storm on the verge of breaking. Still gripping Ray's wrist, Daniel leaned in slightly, his voice calm but laced with an icy edge. I told you not to push me. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Ray groaned, his face pressed against the scorching pavement. The bravado and aggression he had displayed earlier had vanished, replaced by fear and disbelief. The rest of the bikers exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence shaken. They hadn't expected this. They had let their ignorance and assumptions lead them into a situation they clearly couldn't control. For a long moment, the entire station was locked in tense stillness. Finally, one of the bikers, visibly nervous, muttered, "We should get out of here." But Ray, as stubborn as ever, refused to back down. Despite the pain, he gritted his teeth and growled, "Call the cops. This guy just attacked me. He's a fraud, and I want him arrested." Daniel released Ray's wrist and stood up. Ray scrambled into a sitting position, clutching his injured arm. The other bikers quickly moved to help their leader, though none dared get too close to Daniel. One of them pulled out a phone and dialed 911. "There's a guy here impersonating a soldier," he said into the phone, his voice unsteady. "We need the police right away." Daniel took a deep breath, his heart still pounding. He knew this wasn't over. The police would arrive soon, and he would have to defend himself again. Not just against the bikers, but also against whatever assumptions the officers might bring with them. The weight of the moment pressed on him. The encounter wasn't just about him anymore. It was about standing up for the truth, no matter how stacked the odds might seem. Time seemed to crawl. Daniel stood by his car, watching as the bikers crowded around Ray, who was still rubbing his injured wrist. The harsh midday sun bore down relentlessly, adding a stifling weight to the already tense atmosphere. Before long, the piercing sound of police sirens shattered the uneasy silence. A patrol car sped into the gas station, its red and blue lights flashing against the clear afternoon sky. Daniel felt the gravity of the moment. He didn't know how things would unfold, but he braced himself for whatever lay ahead. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong, yet experience had taught him that sometimes the truth didn't matter. Two officers stepped out of the patrol car, a tall, broad-shouldered man and a woman with a steady presence. Both wore sunglasses, their expressions serious as they surveyed the scene. A group of burly bikers, their leader nursing an injured wrist, and a black man in military fatigues standing calmly beside his vehicle. The male officer, who seemed to take the lead, approached first. His demeanor was calm but firm as his gaze swept across the group. "We got a call about a disturbance here," he said. "Can someone explain what's going on?" Ray, eager to seize control of the situation, stepped forward and pointed an accusing finger at Daniel. "This guy's wearing a military uniform, but he's not a real soldier. He attacked me when I called him out on it. We need him arrested for impersonating a service member." The officer's eyes flicked to Daniel, whose calm exterior belied the rapid pounding of his heart. The officer turned back to Ray, his expression neutral. "Is that so?" he asked, his tone giving nothing away. Daniel knew this was the moment that would shape everything. He stepped forward, meeting the officer's gaze with quiet determination. "Officer, I didn't attack anyone. This man and his group confronted me because they thought I wasn't a real soldier. I tried to de-escalate the situation, but when he grabbed me, I defended myself." The female officer, standing beside her colleague, shifted her attention to the bikers. Her sharp, assessing gaze moved across the group. "Is that true?" she asked. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence faltering. One of them mumbled hesitantly he was just defending himself. "But that doesn't mean he's not faking it." The first officer sighed, clearly weighing the conflicting accounts. He turned to Daniel. "Do you have any proof of your service, sir?" Daniel nodded firmly. "Yes, officer. In the passenger seat of my car, I have my official uniform along with my badges and insignia." Daniel turned back to face Ray, his steady gaze meeting the older man's defiant eyes. "I just came back from physical therapy," Daniel said, his voice low but resolute. "These shoes helped me recover from injuries I got while serving overseas. But I don't owe you an explanation for what I wear or why I wear it. You don't get to decide who's real and who isn't." Daniel's words landed like a heavy blow. The entire group of bikers fell silent, the weight of his statement sinking in. Ray looked down, a flicker of realization crossing his face. Perhaps for the first time, he understood just how wrong he had been. The two officers exchanged glances, their decision clear. But there was still unfinished business. The male officer stepped closer to Ray, his tone turning firm and authoritative. "You assaulted this man without cause. That's battery. I have to take you into custody." Ray's eyes widened, the arrogance stripped from his face. "No, I didn't. I didn't do anything." "Yes, you did," the female officer interrupted, her voice sharp. "You're lucky he's not pressing charges, but we can't let this go." The remaining bikers stood frozen, their shock evident as they watched their leader be handcuffed and escorted to the patrol car. Ray struggled, protesting, but it was too late. The tables had turned. The man who had instigated the confrontation now faced consequences he never anticipated. Daniel stood quietly, watching the scene unfold. A mix of relief and justice washed over him. The officers had handled the situation fairly, and the truth had prevailed. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight on his shoulders begin to lift. As the officers prepared to leave, one of the bikers, his face pale and uneasy, stepped hesitantly toward Daniel. We didn't know," the man said, his voice tinged with regret. "I'm sorry. It's just, we've seen a lot of people pretending." Daniel cut him off, his tone calm but firm, without any trace of warmth. "Next time," Daniel said evenly, locking eyes with the biker, "think before you judge someone based on what they look like. Things aren't always what they seem." The biker nodded slowly, guilt etched across his face. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'm sorry." Daniel said nothing more. He turned, got into his car, and sat for a moment, letting the adrenaline coursing through him begin to subside. As he started the engine, a sense of peace slowly began to replace the tension. Today, justice had found its way, and the truth had spoken louder than prejudice. Daniel glanced back at the scene one last time before starting his car. The group of bikers stood awkwardly around one another, while Ray sat silently in the back seat of the police car, handcuffed, his earlier arrogance now nothing more than a faded memory. As Daniel's car pulled out of the gas station and merged onto the open road, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just occurred. Today, he hadn't just defended himself from a physical attack. He had taken a stand against ignorance and prejudice, forces he had battled far too often in his life. The steady hum of the engine and the expansive highway stretching ahead gave him space to reflect. Despite his composure, the encounter left lingering emotions, an undercurrent of frustration and fatigue that wasn't easy to dismiss. His thoughts drifted back to his years in the military, where he had faced enemies on foreign soil. Yet here, in the country he had sworn to protect, he found himself grappling with challenges of a different nature, ones born from bias and misunderstanding, rather than bullets or bombs. The scenery blurred. As he drove, lush green fields, leaves rustling under towering trees, their tranquility a stark contrast to the turmoil still weighing on his mind. This was supposed to be a peaceful return home, but the events at the gas station lingered, heavy and unresolved. It wasn't just the insults or threats. It was the way the bikers had questioned his identity, his very existence as a soldier, a violation deeper than any words. Daniel recalled the words of a former commanding officer. "Not all battles are fought on the battlefield. Some take place in the hearts and minds of those around you." Today had been one of those battles. Even though Ray had been arrested and the bikers had shown some semblance of regret, Daniel knew the story wasn't over. The justice system would take time, and Ray's actions might lead to consequences far beyond a single night in jail. More pressing, though, was the question of whether the bikers had truly learned anything. Would they reflect on what had happened, or would they double down on their prejudices, sinking deeper into their ignorance? After a few miles of driving, Daniel decided to pull into a small diner on the edge of town. He needed a moment to rest, to calm his thoughts, and to regain a sense of balance after the emotional whirlwind. The neon sign flickered warmly, and the faint aroma of coffee wafting from inside seemed to promise a brief respite from the chaos. The small bell above the door jingled softly as Daniel stepped inside. The diner was nearly empty, with only a few truck drivers seated in the corner, sipping their coffee quietly. The soft hum of conversation and the faint clinking of dishes offered a welcome sense of normalcy, a moment of peace amidst the storm. The server, a middle-aged woman with a warm smile, looked up as Daniel sat down at the counter. "What can I get you, hon?" she asked, her voice gentle and friendly. Daniel glanced briefly at the menu before making his choice. "Just a black coffee, please." "Thank you." She nodded and moved to pour him a cup. When she placed it in front of him, her eyes lingered on his face, as if trying to read the story written in his expression. "You look like you've had a long day," she remarked with quiet understanding. Daniel gave a faint smile. "You could say that." The server leaned slightly on the counter, her gaze curious but respectful. "Want to talk about it? I'm a good listener, and there's not much else going on around here." Daniel hesitated, unsure if he wanted to revisit the events of the day, but something in her genuine demeanor made him feel at ease. Slowly, he began to recount what had happened, the group of bikers, the confrontation, and everything that followed. He kept the details sparse, but she grasped the essence of the story. When he finished, the woman shook her head slowly, her expression a mixture of disbelief and empathy. "People can be so ignorant sometimes," she said softly, "but it sounds like you handled it as well as anyone could." Daniel shrugged. "I just did what I had to do. Still, it's frustrating. Fighting for a country and then coming home only to feel like you don't belong here." Her smile faltered briefly before returning, softer this time. "I understand that feeling, but today you made a difference. Even if they don't fully get it yet, you stood your ground. That has to count for something." Daniel nodded, grateful for her words. "Hopefully." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds in the diner the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint clink of dishes. The quiet was a welcome reprieve, a sharp contrast to the chaos he had endured earlier at the gas station. Eventually, Daniel finished his coffee, paid his bill, and thanked the server. "Take care of yourself," she said, waving goodbye as he headed for the door. Outside, the evening air was cooler, and Daniel felt a small but significant sense of relief. While the day had been far from perfect, the kindness of a stranger reminded him that understanding and empathy still existed, even in the midst of adversity. In the days that followed, Daniel tried to return to his routine, but the incident at the gas station spread through the town like wildfire. Before long, people were buzzing about the confrontation at the gas station, with different versions of the story being passed around. Some, particularly other veterans, reached out to Daniel to express their support and outrage at how he had been treated. But there were others who seemed hesitant, unsure of which version of the events to believe. One afternoon, while Daniel was working in his garage, repairing an old car engine, his phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from a local journalist who had heard about the story and wanted to interview him. At first, Daniel hesitated. He wasn't the kind of person who sought the spotlight, but as he thought about it, he realized this could be an opportunity, not just to share what had happened, but to address the larger issue, the prejudice and racism he had endured. Maybe, just maybe, this could spark some kind of change. A few days later, Daniel agreed to meet the journalist at a small park in town. The weather was mild, with a crisp touch of early autumn in the air. The journalist, a young woman with sharp eyes and a notepad always at the ready, seemed eager to hear his account. "Mr. Daniel," she began, her tone professional but warm, "I've heard a lot about what happened at the gas station, but I'd like to hear it directly from you. What was going through your mind at the time?" Daniel took a deep breath before recounting the events. He described the biker's initial taunts, how the situation escalated, and the moment he had to defend himself. He didn't hold back, sharing his emotions, anger, frustration, and the deep sadness of realizing that some people still judged him based solely on the color of his skin. The journalist listened intently, scribbling notes in her pad as he spoke. When he finished, she paused for a moment, as if carefully considering her next question. "Do you think incidents like this happen often in this town? Or was this just an isolated case?" Daniel thought for a few seconds before answering. I think it happens more often than people realize, he said, his voice steady. It might not always be as public or obvious, but prejudice is still here. People make judgments without ever trying to understand someone else. The journalist nodded, her pen moving swiftly across the page. Do you think sharing your story will help change that? She asked. Daniel sighed. I don't know if it'll change everyone's mind, but if it makes even one person think twice before judging someone, then it's worth it. The journalist offered him a small smile, the kind that carried both empathy and determination. Well, your story will reach more people than you think, she said. As they wrapped up the interview, Daniel felt a mix of relief and trepidation. He didn't know what impact his words might have, but for the first time since the incident, he felt like he'd taken a step toward something meaningful. The interview stretched on for nearly an hour. Daniel shared more about his time in the military, the challenges of being a black man in America, and his hope that the gas station incident could spark a broader conversation about racism and mutual respect. When the interview ended, Daniel felt a sense of relief, as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. A few days later, the article was published and quickly made waves in the community. Many reached out to Daniel, some to apologize for the way he had been treated, others to discuss the issues he had highlighted. The local Veterans of Foreign Wars, VFW, chapter even invited him to speak at one of their events, an invitation he accepted with heartfelt sincerity. Weeks after the incident, Daniel was surprised by an unexpected visitor at his doorstep. It was one of the bikers from the gas station, a man named Harris, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation. Harris stood on the porch, shifting his weight uneasily from one foot to the other. I'm not here to cause any trouble, he said quickly, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. I came to apologize. I was wrong. We were all wrong. At the time, I didn't see it, but looking back, what we did was unacceptable. Daniel stood silently for a moment, watching Harris, unsure of what to say. But there was something in the man's eyes, an earnestness that couldn't be ignored. After a few tense seconds, Daniel gave a small nod. Come in. Let's talk. The two men sat in Daniel's living room, the air heavy with unspoken tension. Harris began to open up, his voice low and steady. He recounted how the incident at the gas station had lingered in his mind, forcing him to confront some uncomfortable truths. I grew up with prejudices I never questioned, Harris admitted, his eyes dropping to the floor. That day I wasn't just afraid of your strength. I was afraid of what it meant, afraid that my whole worldview might be wrong. He paused, his voice faltering as if weighing each word. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Harris continued, and I realized I have so much to learn. About people, about respect, about everything. Daniel listened carefully, his face revealing little. He had heard apologies before, some heartfelt, others hollow. But there was something about Harris's words that felt genuine, like a man truly grappling with his past mistakes. For a moment, the room was quiet, save for the soft hum of a clock in the background. Finally, Daniel leaned back in his chair, his tone measured. Recognizing you were wrong is a start, he said. But what matters is what you do next. Apologies are just words if they're not followed by action. Harris nodded slowly, his expression somber. I know, and I intend to do better, he said. I've been reading, listening, trying to unlearn things I didn't even know were there. I won't pretend I'll get it right all the time, but I'm going to try. Daniel studied him for a moment longer before offering a slight nod. Then, try, Daniel said simply. Harris left a short while later, the tension between them replaced with something that felt closer to understanding. As Daniel watched him walk down the driveway, he couldn't be certain if Harris's journey toward change would last. But for the first time in weeks, he felt a flicker of hope, a small but meaningful step toward something better. I appreciate you coming here, Daniel said after a moment of silence. Takes courage to admit when you're wrong. Harris nodded, his face flushed with a mix of relief and embarrassment. I'm trying to be better, he said earnestly. As their conversation continued, Daniel felt an unfamiliar sensation, a sense of closure. The pain from that day lingered, but Harris's decision to come forward and apologize was a sign that perhaps change was possible. When Harris left, they weren't friends, but there was a mutual understanding between them. It was only a small step, but in a world where prejudice and hatred could feel overwhelming, it felt like significant progress. This story reminds us of the courage it takes to stand against prejudice and the power of change when individuals are willing to confront their own flaws. Have you ever faced prejudice or had to defend yourself against judgment? What would you do if you were in Daniel's position? Share your thoughts or experiences in the comments. Your voice could inspire and motivate others. If this story resonated with you, don't hesitate to share it with friends and loved ones to spread the message of respect, understanding, and hope. Thank you for following along. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss more inspiring and meaningful stories. Remember, change begins with small but consistent steps, and you can be part of that change. Thank you for supporting the channel. Like, share, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest content. These stories are drawn from various sources and do not represent any specific individual or organization. They are shared to promote human values in life and have been rewritten with the assistance of AI. If there are any inaccuracies, please understand and forgive us. Wishing you all the best in life.